Our next speaker is Gary Flomenhoft. And Gary is a fellow and lecturer at the Gunn Institute of Ecological Economics at the University of Vermont, where he coordinates the Green Tax and Common Assets project from 2005 to 2013. He has testified many times to Vermont towns and state legislators on green taxes, collecting economic rent for use of the common assets, and land and value taxation. Gary previously studied ecological economics at Hermondale at the University of Maryland, was a co-founder of the Geonomy Society in California with Jeffrey Smith, and was founding member of the Green Party of California. With you all, Gary.
Thank you for inviting me here. Alana asked me to talk mostly about the money commons, to answer Amir's question, but I didn't exactly follow instructions, so I hope you'll bear with me as I diverge onto another topic of interest, which is conscious evolution. Wanted to give a little bit on that as well. And I would also put this up here for all of us in the room to keep in mind. What we're trying to do is very difficult, so don't get discouraged. So I wanted to talk about conscious evolution and introduce you to one of my favorite thinkers, who is Riane Eisler, and she has a place called the Center for Partnership Studies, and has come up with the concept of a partnership economy. And the idea is that we've been in this long history of a dominator society, and we need to go to a partnership system. And you can identify a dominator system because it's shaped like a pyramid, with people at the top dominating the people at the bottom, and you can, neoliberal economics falls into this category, and in a partnership economy it's more in the shape of a circle, and she calls it the campaign for a caring economy, which I think is very important. And this is sort of my view on conscious evolution. I call it the paradigm dialectic. And you've got the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. The thesis being the dominator society, the antithesis, the anti-dominator, and then the synthesis being the partnership. But historically, we're coming from a 10,000-year period of patriarchy. And the response to that being feminism, and the synthesis being egalitarianism. And also, along with that comes the idea of humans dominating the earth. The idea of the Roman concept of dominion. And that's been attacked by the environmental community, people like Earth First, saying that no, the earth is the center of the universe, not human beings, and the synthesis might be humans as a part of nature, and getting that understanding. And then I would like to, maybe this is a shock to you all, but the idea of infinite growth is an obsolete ideology on a finite planet. Sorry to tell you that, because a lot of Georgians believe in that. And the opposite of that is no growth, and of course the synthesis being sustainability. An economy that can be continued forever without depleting the Earth's resources. And so in the economic terms, you could say we had capitalism, the antithesis communism. What is the synthesis? Many people would say geoism is the synthesis, perhaps a more just, caring system. And I just put the yin-yang symbol as sort of the example of combining polar opposites into a greater synthesis. So that's my pitch on conscious evolution. Okay, so getting to economics. In ecological economics, we look at the economy much as Henry George did, as throughput, physical throughput. And as George described, land is converted by labor and capital into goods. And land includes the entire natural world, which is the resources, and the sites, which is where economic activity takes place, but it also includes waste. So that's the whole process of throughput. And you have to consider all three, not just the sites, which we tend to fixate on, which will, if we look at progress, might get us a little depressed. However, Phil Anderson recommends that we take a look at Singapore. He points out as a successful example of a place that collects land rent and not a lot of taxes. So perhaps we should do that. Okay, let's go and look at each one of these categories. Okay, and I want to give you the good news, and I'm not talking about Baby George. In the United States, 39 states collect between 1 and 7, collect economic rent on between 1 and 7 different resources, including minerals, ores, fuels, forests, fisheries, etc. And this is in accord with what Mason Gaffney wrote in his paper, The Taxable Capacity of Land, More Than Enough. I forget the exact title. It's Enough and to Spare. Enough and to Spare. So this is just at the US level. 39 states are already collecting economic rent on resources. So this is a success story that we should be aware of. The good news, next. And globally, we have about 70 sovereign wealth funds collecting rent on oil and gas and fossil fuels and other minerals, including diamonds, copper, even phosphates. And quite often, these are put in trust funds, which are spent on public purposes. Have I heard that before? Take rent, spend it on public goods. Okay. I think that was in Progress in Poverty. They often, believe it or not, Alabama, Louisiana, the most backward states in the United States have trust funds, Texas, that they spend on education, and other countries often spend it on development. So this is a Georgia's policy. Collect rent, put it in a trust fund, spend it on public goods. And this is happening in 70 countries. There's one unique case. Go on, I hope it's this. Next slide. One unique case is Alaska. It's the only one that created a trust fund from oil and pays dividends directly to citizens. So they don't spend the capital, but the interest generated, and Alana has some critiques of how they generate that interest, but they distribute the money directly to citizens as a cash dividend annually. And that's something that Thomas Paine advocated. George said that that was an alternative to public goods, was distributing the money directly. And as a result, Alaska has the lowest inequality of any U.S. state in terms of measuring the Gini coefficient, which is a measurement of inequality. So this policy works. Okay. Let's move on to, that's the source side. Let's move on to the sink side, the use of the atmosphere as a dump. That's also land. That's also something that needs to have rent attached to it. And if you look at the trend, there is a tremendous trend in favor of environmental charges. So this is another success story. This is good news. This is the EU history from about 20 years of the increase in environmental charges. Next. And here's just a list of all the different environmental charges that exist in Europe. So this is charging rent for the use of the earth as a dump for waste. So this is economic rent also. And a lot of strong trends in this direction. And we need to join up with these green movements and sovereign wealth funds. And also commons organizations that are advocating these policies. Okay. Next. And I'll give you an example. A specific case of Germany in 1999, their eco-tax reform. They increased their energy taxes by 55%, raised about $90 billion. Next. And they used all of that money to reduce their payroll, the taxes for their pension fund. Let's see, increase tax on rent, reduce taxes on production. I've heard that too. That was 1999 in Germany. So it was very successful. They used 90%, 89% of the increased revenue from energy tax was used to reduce the taxes for their pension fund. So explicitly, a Georgia's policy was very successful in Germany. They only used 2% for administration, 9% went into renewable energy and efficiency. Okay. Case study, Europe. Okay, so getting to Vermont. We had a great introduction to the idea of sharing the commons. I think the concept of sharing is very powerful because it involves the idea of giving, whereas when we talk about taxing, it gets us into thinking about what people are going to take away from us. So I really like the concept of sharing. So they've given us the intro at the global level, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we've done at the local and state level, because that's where we can have an impact, at least an easier task of having an impact is at the local and global level.
Local and state.
Local and state level. Okay, so this is the existing tax structure in the state of Vermont. We have a property tax, standard property tax, which lumps land and buildings together. 1/3 land, 2/3 on buildings is the total assessment on average. We have quite a bit on energy and a few things on air and waste. It's about 25% of the total taxes in Vermont are already green taxes. Next. So we advocated $500 million. You can pass those around, by the way.
You said you wanted them back.
It's okay. That's all right. You can pass those around. So those are copies of our reports. So we came up with $500 million in additional green taxes, and we suggested that we do exactly what they do in Germany, which is take that $500 million and reduce the payroll tax, which pays for our old age pension, our Social Security system. The reason is the payroll tax is far more regressive than our income tax. Income tax has a substantial exclusion, something like $7,000 or $9,000. Payroll tax starts at 0, so therefore it's far more regressive. So we advocated that, and that was one of the options. Next. Another option was to replace all of the taxes in Vermont with green taxes, which mainly included land and tax on carbon, as well as solid waste. And if you did that, you could generate the $2.6 billion annual revenue of the state and replace all the taxes on anything else in the state. Okay, next. So getting back to resources, I'm a big fan of Peter Barnes' work on sharing the commons. He wrote a book called Capitalism 3.0, and he advocated these trust idea of common assets trust funds, which they've also talked about. And we thought about, okay, how could we implement that on a state level? Collect rent for the use of the commons, put it in a trust fund, use it for environmental social goods as well as direct payments. Next. So we originated the idea of the Vermont Common Assets Trust Fund, which works exactly the way he described: protect assets, collect fees, put them in a fund, and manage both the asset and the fund to protect both of them. Protect not only the financial fund, but also the fund of natural resources that generates the rent. And it's very important to do both. Of course, Alaska, they only protect the financial fund. They don't do anything about the environment. Next. And we've had this legislation introduced twice in the state, which is the Vermont Common Assets Trust Fund. And we put in there 25% at least of the revenue should be distributed directly to citizens. And I think this is a crucial issue because it gets citizens engaged. As long as it's just going to government, people could care less. They could not care less because it doesn't affect them directly. If they're getting a direct payment, they pay attention and they want to protect both the financial asset and the natural resource. And that's been proven in Alaska. It is the most popular policy in history, and they've tried to get rid of it, and the public won't stand for it because they're getting a deposit to their bank account every month. Yeah. And so what kind of sovereign wealth do we have in Vermont? Well, we don't have much. We have got no oil, natural gas, minerals, nothing. What do we have? We don't even have that much wind. What do we have? Next. We've got cows and maple syrup. Okay. and Ben and Jerry's ice cream. You know.
Not corporate.
Right, which, yeah, was bought out by a corporation. Okay, so after we proposed the bill, they came back and asked me, well, how much is it worth? So we had to figure that out. And I don't want to spend too much time on the natural assets because you all understand collecting rent on that. But I think the social assets deserve a little bit of explanation, so I wanted to do that. And we left some things out. Most medical research is publicly funded, and yet the public receives nothing. All of the patents are given to corporations. Okay, and that's just one example that we didn't even touch. And there's huge amounts of money involved. Most, like the four most popular drugs were all publicly funded, including Prozac and Taxol and all these others. All come from public funding. What did the public get back from it? Nothing. All given to corporations. Okay. So let's talk about the social common assets, just because they're a little more obscure. And I want to give a George's justification for a financial transaction tax. Peter Barnes started the company Working Assets. And he thought about, it was a private company, he thought about taking it public. And he went to the investment bank, whatever, to talk to them. And he said, well, what's going to happen? And they said, well, what's it going to be worth? He said, well, the next day after you go public, your company will be worth 30% more. And he was like puzzled. I said, well, why is that? And just the process of taking a company public, because of the infrastructure that's publicly funded, publicly created, the stock market itself, the regulations governing the transactions of securities, and the liquidity of being able to trade stocks, increase the value of his company overnight to by 30%, which means that 30% of all of the financial assets in the world are publicly created. But he decided not to do it. He kept the company private. But that is the justification that for charging a financial transaction tax and recovering some of that publicly created value for the public, as well as to stop this huge volatility in this casino capitalism. Next would be money creation. And I hesitate to use the word seigniorage because Nick Tiedemann will call me on that because it has a slightly different meaning. But it's about the creation of money. As Emir pointed out, 97% of the money in the world is created by banks through loans that they collect interest on. That is a huge monopoly privilege given to bank. It's actually unconstitutional in the United States. Andrew Jackson, if you read his writings, said so. And there's a lot of campaigns for public money. It's been written about a lot. Well, the key policy we need is 100% reserve requirements so banks can no longer create money. Everybody thinks banks loan out money that's on deposit. That's not what they do. They create 10 times or 20 times the original loan through fractional reserves. And if you just look at the Fed in the United States, it is creating $85 billion a month and buying treasury bonds and crappy mortgage securities from banks. That's $1 trillion a year. So we calculated if that was distributed, why are they, and they have to give it to banks, right? Why don't they give it to us? Okay, so if they gave it to us, that would be $3,000 a year per person. There's no reason other than the way the current system is set up. They could just as easily pay it out to us as an annual dividend. And there's some history in the Isle of Guernsey where they have interest-free money created by the local government spent on infrastructure. Okay? And then finally, another one, broadcast spectrum, at least in the US, 98% of the broadcast spectrum has been given away free for no charge. Huge, huge value right there. And the internet was 100% publicly funded in the United States, created by the US military. And I think maybe Google and Facebook should pay us rent for having created the internet that they can use to make a profit. So we put that in there. And then, of course, land value, we all know, is it's socially created asset. Okay, so here's what we did. Go ahead. This is how comprehensive the bill was. It included everything, ecosystem services, the global atmosphere, you name it. Everything was included. Okay, go on. Yeah, go on. I'm just going to, yeah.
No, no.
I'm going to skip a lot of this. This was a CO2 emissions. We looked at, on the low side, $3 a ton. On the high side, $300 a ton. And people say, oh my God, $300 a ton, that's crazy. Well, guess what? That's, the effect on petrol is 100 to 1. So $300 on carbon is equal to about $3 on gasoline or petrol. Well, in Austria, a bunch of states already listed, there's already greater than $4 a gallon on fuel. So they already have the equivalent of a $400 a ton carbon tax. So that's not so crazy as it sounds. Go on. Fish and wildlife we looked at, low and high, go on. Forests, go on. Go on. Groundwater. Bottlers take groundwater. It's a public trust resource in Vermont. How come the well owner isn't paying us rent for using our water? Next. They sell it back. They get it for, it costs bottlers 10 cents a gallon to bottle water, including all of their costs. They sell it to us for $6 in the convenience stores a gallon. It costs them 10 cents. There's a bit of economic rent there. Okay, go on. Surface water, 82% of the surface water withdrawals in the state are used to cool the nuclear power plant, which we voted to shut down, and the federal government has kept it open. Next. Go on. Mining, we looked at. Go on. And then finally, Amir brought this up yesterday about collecting rent on wind, and we looked at that. We could generate between $4 and $170 million from collecting the economic rent on current and future wind power in Vermont. Okay, next. Because the wind is also part of the commons that we all own. Why should the landowner get all the money or the local community be bribed with a few little, benefits? And then land rent, of course, we looked at. We said 10%. And you might say, oh my God, 10%. Well, guess what? Altoona has a 37% land tax. So 10% is not unreasonable as collecting 100% of the price, 100% of the economic rent on land. Go on. Go on. And then we looked at the internet, 30 million perhaps in Vermont from that. Go on. It's actually illegal right now to charge rent for the internet. It's a giveaway. And the spectrum, as I said, is worth about $375 million a year, just prorated from the national figures that we got from the New Economics Foundation. No, it was a New America Foundation. Go on. And then the Dean Baker did two calculations on how much you could get from 0.25% financial transaction tax. There are existing ones that are higher. And that was ranged between $260 to $740 million just in the state of Vermont. We have a lot of trust funders. We call them trustafarians. Next. And then, of course, money. Until we get public money, we said, well, banks should give us a percentage of all the loans. Go ahead, next. Go on. And we put that all together, and we got between $1,900 to $10,000 per person per year in the state of Vermont in our Vermont Common Assets Trust Fund. Next. And here's my check. I'm still waiting for it. Haven't gotten it yet, but I'm waiting, hoping we're going to get that. And I'll just end with my favorite cartoon on the topic.
We have time. We
Okay,
have to
that's
take
all I have to
your question, but please frame your questions in a very concise manner so we can have more time. In the back, then Bill, and then the gentleman.
I'll ask the question I was going to ask after the previous presentation, because it's even more relevant now. Henry George, if he'd been alive today, would not have been talking about the land value tax, boring stuff. Would he not have been, with all these technological advances and all these new, hugely valuable sources of economic wealth, would he not have been, do you think, talking about sharing the world's resources? And do you think that maybe our inheritance from Henry George, bless the man, is actually more of a burden to us than it is an asset?
Well, if we limit it to surface sites, yes, but he never said that. He said land was the entire universe. So I don't think you have to,
Yeah, but
you
I mean,
know.
the language, maybe by corruption of language, everybody you talk to out there, you say land to them and you say tax to them, A, they think green fields, B, they think you're going to take something off them.
Right,
That's
I think,
totally counterproductive.
I think the terminology could be, I think sharing the commons is a better way to phrase it. I think it's, the concept is the same, but it's how do you phrase it that really matters. And sharing is much better than taxing, which is a taking. Sharing is a giving, taxing is a taking. The one thing I forgot to say about patriarchy, the number one best policy for development, and you can look at the statistics, it's the empowerment of women. That's the number one most important thing you can do. And I wanted to also quote Frances Moore LePay, who studies world hunger, and they brought up hunger statistics. And Henry George said the same thing. He said the cause of poverty is not, like Malthus said, too many people. And Frances Moore LePay said exactly the same thing. She's been studying hunger for 30 years. She said there is currently and always has been enough food for every single person in the world. It's the maldistribution that has caused the problem. There is not a lack of food for people. That's exactly what Henry George said.
Next question.
My question is for Rajesh, but I want Gary to partially answer it because he skipped over the point so quickly that you might not have heard it. My question for you is, are you aware of what is called the public trust doctrine in law? That is to say, in the year 406 AD, Emperor Justinian instituted a doctrine which still exists in some forms, particularly with respect to groundwater, that groundwater is
Surface
a
water.
commons.
Surface water mainly.
Yeah, surface water. And that which is covered also by surface water, presumably riverbanks. And it is being expanded by various court doctrines, court cases, and I've been given several by two strong Georgist advocates are pursuing this logic further. And I wanted to know first, are you aware of it? Secondly, I want Gary to show how it is being used in Vermont. That's part of the answer.
Well, I'll keep my answer very short. I am aware of it, but I can't say. It's just short,
It's being
short
filmed
response.
and live
Oh,
streamed.
okay. Just to quickly say, thank you for that. I am indeed aware of that, but it's an area that we're now commencing research into in terms of how we can look at different formats of sharing natural resources. So it's not something I have a detailed knowledge about at the moment, but I'm sure Gary does, so I'll hand back over to him.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's great being in England because the public trust doctrine goes back to the codes of Justinian, but also to the British common law based on the Magna Carta and the law of the forest, which gave common rights of use to the commoners ultimately. Well, originally to the nobles, but then it was eventually interpreted to mean common rights as well, and it included hunting, gathering of plants and animals, and also use of, and it's been, in the US at least, it's been transferred to riverways and waterways, which were necessary for transportation. It also applies inherently to wildlife. People have use rights to capture wildlife. And recently in Vermont, they used the public trust doctrine. They expanded it to include groundwater. It never did. They added that 4 years ago. Now groundwater is considered a public trust resource, and therefore it's to be shared by everyone. And on that basis, we are saying that people who own wells must pay the public for the use of our water. So it's being used to make the case for collection of economic rent. And I think the public trust doctrine is an extremely valuable tool for commons movement and also for the Georgist movement to use.
Next question.
Okay, you mentioned 25% as the public dividend. Why 25%, or 20%, or 30%? How did you got to 25?
We copied that from the Alaska legislation.
Okay.
But we felt that there needs to be some direct payment in order to engage the mind of the
I just
citizen.
wonder how big that needs to be.
Yeah, good question. Some people say 100%. I mean, James Hansen, who is the foremost, he's a leading climate scientist for NASA, is advocating a tax and dividend on carbon. And he said the dividend should be 100%. All of the carbon taxes should be refunded to the public 100%. So there's a difference of opinion.
Somebody else? Jacob? In the back there is somebody else that has a question? Okay, but I have Jacob first.
Very briefly.
Jacob and then...
Just very quick comment. I see everyone really saying the same thing. I think that what really needs to just be emphasized is that you have to win people's hearts before you can win their minds. So you don't throw a lot of data at them and say, we need this tax or that tax or this percentage. You start with the feeling of sharing the world's resources, and then what is the practical application of that?
Okay. Amy?
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but FASTA, the NGO organization, Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability, developed at the same time, parallel to Peter Barnes, the cap and share idea, which is the same thing, a cap on carbon, which declines to a sustainable level, and the value of that cap, which is traded ultimately between the south and the north, it's developed as a global solution, would be shared basically on a per capita basis. And we did further work on how we could start doing it in Europe, and we did independent studies on how it would work in China and India, and all of that is on our website, FASTA, FEASTA.org, and then do cap and share and get into it. It's about 9 years of work in this area. Essentially, we took it to the UN. We've done a lot of work on it, but we hit a wall, and of course Richard Douthwaite died last year, who's the main instigator. And if you want to Google Richard Douthwaite, you'll come up with a wealth of work in this area.
And I watched Fred Harrison's film last night, and there was also Annie Leonard's film, the story of cap and stuff, but then she did the story of cap and trade. And there's a lot of skepticism about the cap and trade system, as opposed to, there's a debate between which is better. Should we have a cap and rent, pay rent for permits, or should we just directly tax carbon? And there's some case to be made that that selling permits for the emission of carbon is going to create this huge securities market that's going to be manipulated by Wall Street, and therefore taxing carbon would be a better solution. I used to fall in the cap and share category, and now I'm in the tax and share category.
Last question. Who wants the privilege? Any final comments from our speakers? Do you have something else to add? You like?
Well, just maybe just a very brief comment. Actually, it's interesting. Something that occurred to me when you were talking is this whole thing about, you talked about a shift in evolution, in conscious evolution. It's interesting how we motivate people to accept these sort of policies. It's a bit of a paradox, because in a way you mentioned how it's when people are affected in their pockets that they become motivated to do something about this. And yet at the same time we're trying to create a world where we need a sharing, caring world. And so there's a bit of a paradox there, which is worth reflecting on, because to some extent it's not about our individual pocket, it's about our collective pocket. And then the question is, where do we draw that boundary? What is that collective? Is it at the national level, or is it at the global level? And that leads on obviously to the point that many of the crises we face are global crises, and so we need to think beyond our boundaries, our national boundaries. So that's just a quick comment.
I will ask for a round of applause for our wonderful